So I wanted to show you a little bit of a compositing tutorial, another way to put all your images together once you have all your renders out from Lumion. So I'm going to go through this workflow pretty quickly. I might just turn the audio off and leave some notes so that you can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to just start by dragging one of my color maps. You see I have the color map, the material ID, and the sky alpha for each view. So I'm just going to start by dragging one of these into Photoshop. The first thing I do when I bring a view in is immediately make it a smart object. I do that so that I can replace the rendering if I update it later very easily. All I have to do is double click on this, pop my new render into this file, and hit Control S to save it. And it will automatically update in my main Photoshop file like a link. This is useful if you have applied layer effects or anything else to the base render within the Photoshop file. And it just means that all of those effects, you don't have to do them over again. You can just replace the linked file and they will carry over into the new one. So then I'm going to take my Matte ID channel and pop it in. It automatically comes in as a smart object in Photoshop when I place it like this. So I'll hit enter. You can tell it's a linked file or a smart object by this little icon in the corner of the layer. And it brings it in with the same name as your file name. So for me, I'm just going to replace that with Matte ID just to simplify things, and this one I'll name render. And then I'll bring in my sky alpha. So I usually like to replace the sky, so the first thing I'll do is put a layer mask on my color map, and then I'll go to my alpha and go Control A to select everything there. And then I will Control C to copy it, and I will hit Alt click on the layer mask of my color map, go Control V to paste that in. Control D deselects, and then Control I inverts the colors. And now if I turn off that layer, you can see I have a transparent sky background, and now I can put in a sky of my choosing. So I usually start by putting these into a folder called Render and Background. And in the background, I will often put a sky. But first, what I'm going to do is just kind of take a look at the view. And as it came out of Lumion, is pretty good, but I think it could be a little bit more dynamic. So what I like to do is go into my smart object by double clicking on the linked file, and now you can see it retains the sky. So the layer mask is just a clipping mask that clips that out. And I'm going to use some tools within Photoshop, the dodge tool, which is a tool that lightens, highlights, or just lightens the overall coloration of what's in the file. And then dodge, burn, which is the darkening tool. So I do this very lightly. I like to choose my midtones, maybe at 4 to 6%. I'm going to try 6% and just see how it goes. So you'll see as I pass over that there's just a very subtle lightening of all of the midtones within the file. I'm just sweeping this brush over top. And then I'm going to go to the highlights and put it on 4%. And now you can see the highlights of the file are getting brighter within the image. So if I feel that the shadows need to be lightened as well, I might go to shadows and do something around that. And I'll just lower my brush down a bit just to make it a little bit more targeted to the shadows. And I'll just sweep it across some of the shadow areas here to lighten those up. If I want to do it twice, you can just let up on the mouse and lighten again. So just use this as a brush to lighten up shadows. You don't want to go overboard on this. You don't want to end up with something that looks like high dynamic range, but this is just to bring back some of the details within the shaded areas and to add some more dynamic light. So after I'm done with that, I can think about whether I want to desaturate some of my image. So I could use the sponge tool. Right now it's set to saturate. I'm going to set it to desaturate. And then this again is like a brush. So if I right click, I can access the brush settings, and I'm just going to lower it down here. I'm going to desaturate maybe by 10% or so, just in some of the greens of the trees, which I find Lumion tends to really amp up. And maybe some of the background grasses here. So it's a very subtle effect. I'm also definitely going to desaturate some of these flowers that are in the planter. Great. So after I'm happy with that, I can just hit Control S to save. And the file is updated in my Photoshop file. Now, often, even with doing some of those lightning adjustments, I find that I have to brighten even further still in Photoshop. So I'll usually duplicate my render layer and name it render screen and put this onto screen, and usually around 25 or 35%. Then I might go in and use my eraser brush to erase out any of the areas where I don't want the screen effect to happen. So maybe I want to retain some of the shadows on the trees because this is backlit, so I can just kind of erase those out. But I want the foreground to kind of retain its brightness, so I'll just do a soft eraser brush here. And that I'll just turn off the layer mask so you can see the impact. So that's with the layer mask off. This is with the layer mask on, so just the foreground is brighter. Now I noticed that in my rendering, some of my plants were intersecting with my planters. So within my main render smart object, I can double click again and go in. I'm going to hit Control 1 to go to 100% and then just zoom in even more. And I can use the healing brush tool or the content aware fill tool to just go over some of those areas and fix them up so that we don't see the plants intersecting with these materials. If there's a large region that I want to fix, I'll just select it with my polygonal lasso like this and use my edit, fill, content aware fill and see if that helps. I'll just take a look around the rest of the view just to make sure there's no other objects that need to be fixed up here. It was looking pretty good. Sometimes when you have paths such as the model you're working in that came from SketchUp, everything looks a little bit chunky along the edge. If your grass isn't covering up those chunks, you might want to just go in with your content aware brush tool and just try to fix those up within the view. So I can Control save my smart object and click out of it. And now you see that not just the original render, but also the render screen have been automatically updated. So no matter how many times I duplicate this and use it over top of the view, the smart object remains the same for both of these. So if I update one linked file, it updates everything and propagates it. So this is why I always use smart objects. Okay, so the next thing I might do is consider the background and what I want to work on there. So I know I'm definitely going to want to add a sky. And then I might think if I need to improve any of the textures in the Photoshop file from the rendering. So if I am not happy with the texture of the grass, maybe I want to add a little bit more texture. Maybe I want to add some more dynamism to this planter here. And then I'll probably want to improve some of the plants within these planters here. These are all just standard Lumion plants. They're not super ideal. They do look pretty CG. It's probably okay for the view that I'm working on now, but If I can find some better, more photorealistic plants in my library, I'll probably add them, especially to the foreground. And then I'll also add people. So what I'll probably do is make another render that doesn't have these silhouettes turned on. Oops. And I'll just replace that in my smart object linked file. But for now, this is useful for me to have a sense of scale so I know how high my people are going to be. I could probably even add a couple more scale figures just to make sure that I've got it right. Okay, so one more thing I feel like I might want to do is actually just go back to my screen layer and use my brush tool to brush in where this installation is, just to give it a little bit of extra brightness compared to the background. So I'm just brushing back in my screen layer, and you can see it lightens up the buildings behind, so you might have to go in with the eraser and just kind of gently brush that out again, so it doesn't look like there's a halo around it. But I just wanted to brighten that up a little bit more. I might even pop this up to 35. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to keep working, and I'll leave the recording on, and I'll probably just fast forward and put in whatever commands I'm using as I go.